The Weight of 5 Christmases. Patrick Sullivan dressed in darkness. His hands found the work shirt by memory, rough cotton stiff with yesterday's coal dust. The lamp on his bedside table cast thin light across the wooden floor. Outside the frosted window, stars still held the December sky. 4:30 in the morning. Christmas Day, 1887. He moved through the small house on silent feet. 3 boys in one room, their breath rising in clouded rhythm. James, 13 now. Slept with one arm flung over the quilt Patrick's wife had sewn 6 years ago. Samuel and Tommy shared the other bed, tangled together for warmth. Patrick paused in the doorway, memorized their faces the way he did every Christmas morning. Annie's room was smallest, 9 years old. Dark hair like her mother's spread across the pillow. She'd left her rag doll on the chair. Patrick had sewn it himself 3 nights ago. Fingers clumsy with needle and thread. Not store-bought. Nothing was ever store-bought. Triple pay meant food for January. Shoes that fit growing feet. Medicine if someone caught fever. He descended the stairs, each creak familiar. On the kitchen table sat 4 small gifts wrapped in brown paper. A carved whistle for Tommy. A wooden horse for Samuel. Annie's doll. For James. A pocket knife Patrick had sharpened until it could split paper. His own Christmas was the mine. Patrick pulled on his coat, heavy wool that smelled of sweat and earth. The lunch pail sat by the door, packed last night, cornbread and salt pork, thermos of weak coffee. He stepped into cold that stole breath. Snow crunched under his boots, sound loud in the sleeping town. Other houses showed no light. Other fathers slept beside wives, would wake to children's laughter and warm kitchens. Patrick walked alone. The minehead frame rose black against purple sky, a skeleton of timber and iron, mouth open to swallow men. The hoist house was lit, smoke rising from its chimney. Someone else was always working Christmas. Patrick took comfort in that. He wasn't the only one who measured love in wages earned. He signed the roster, checked his lamp. The foreman nodded. They didn't speak. What was there to say? The cage descended. Darkness swallowed the lamplight. Patrick closed his eyes and saw his children's sleeping faces. Told himself this was right. This was what fathers did. Some men measure their love in presence. Patrick Sullivan measured his in absence, 1,000 feet down. The cage stopped. Patrick stepped into the tunnel, pickaxe heavy on his shoulder. Coal seams stretched in every direction, veins of black gold that fed families and broke backs. He found his section, set his lamp on an outcrop, raised the pickaxe. The first strike rang through the silence like a church bell nobody would hear. The seamstress who noticed. Clara Brennan stood at her kitchen window with coffee steaming in her hands. Dawn came slow in December, painting the world gray before gold touched the mountains. She watched Patrick Sullivan's silhouette disappear down the road, lunch pail swinging. 3 months she'd lived next door. 3 months of observing the Sullivan household through the careful distance of new neighbors. The children woke at 7. Clara saw lamplight bloom in their windows. She imagined them finding the brown paper packages, opening them with the particular care of children who knew gifts were rare and precious. James emerged first, trudging to the woodshed for kindling, his breath clouded white. He was 13 but moved like a man twice his age, shoulders set against burdens Clara couldn't see but recognized anyway. She knew about burdens. 5 years since her husband died in a mine collapse 2 towns over. 5 years of widowhood without children. Her body unable to give what her heart wanted most. She'd moved here seeking quiet. Found loneliness instead. But loneliness taught observation. And Clara observed everything. The Sullivan children built a snowman in the yard while breakfast cooked. Annie directed her brothers with fierce concentration, packing snow with determined hands. They laughed, but the sound was thin, fragile. Down the street, the Johnsons gathered on their porch in Sunday best. The blacksmith's children ran circles in new coats. Widow Martinez carried a pie toward her daughter's house, grandchildren already shrieking her name. The Sullivan house remained subdued, Clara set down her coffee cup. She'd been alone 5 Christmases, cooked small meals for one, attended church services where everyone pitied the childless widow, returned to empty rooms. She understood the particular ache of celebration that felt like performance. Patrick Sullivan had been performing for 5 years. His children were performing right now, pretending their father's absence was normal. Clara made a decision. She pulled her shawl from the hook, found her market basket. The general store would be open until noon. Old Harold never closed completely. Not even Christmas. She'd need a ham, real butter, flour for pie crust, potatoes and carrots, dried apples if Harold had them. She'd cook a feast. She'd set a table. And she'd wait however long it took for Patrick Sullivan to come home. 5 years was long enough for any man to celebrate alone. Clara locked her door and walked toward Main Street. Snow squeaked under her boots. Church bells rang in the distance, calling the faithful. She had different worship in mind today. Through the Sullivans' window, she glimpsed James helping Annie tie a scarf on their snowman. The boy's face held the expression Clara had seen in her own mirror countless times. It was the look of someone trying very hard to be enough. The choice he made 5 years ago. Sarah had been alive. Patrick allowed himself to remember while the pickaxe struck coal. Memories came easier in darkness, where they couldn't ambush him with daylight clarity. Sarah laughing in their kitchen. Sarah heavy with child. Hands on her swollen belly. Sarah promising this baby would be their last. Tommy had been born on a Tuesday in March. The doctor arrived too late. There was too much blood. Too many things going wrong that Patrick didn't understand. He'd held the newborn while Sarah's breathing grew shallow. She'd looked at the baby, smiled, said his name would be Thomas, after her father. Then she was gone. Patrick had stood in that bedroom holding a screaming infant and $3,000 in medical debt. The doctor wanted payment. The undertaker wanted payment. The bank held the mortgage. He'd had 2 choices: lose the house or take every shift the mine offered. Christmas Day paid triple that first year, hollow-eyed and broken. Patrick had dressed in darkness while his mother-in-law watched the children. He descended into the earth and swung his pickaxe until his hands bled. The wages fed his family through January. The second Christmas. His mother-in-law was dead too. James, only 9, had cooked breakfast for his siblings. Patrick worked, came home to sleeping children and cold stew. By the third Christmas, the pattern had calcified. Patrick wasn't choosing anymore. He was simply doing what Patrick Sullivan did. He was the man who sacrificed everything, the man who worked while others celebrated, the man who loved through absence. His children never complained. They thought this was what fathers did. 2 weeks ago, the foreman had called Patrick into the office. "You've earned Christmas off this year. Sullivan. Take it. Spend it with your kids." Patrick had stared at the offer, felt panic rise like floodwater. Christmas at home meant sitting in rooms where Sarah's ghost still lived. Meant watching his children try to manufacture joy for his benefit. Meant feeling the vast emptiness his wages couldn't fill. "I'll take the shift, sir." Patrick had said, "My kids are counting on it." The foreman had nodded, unsurprised. Patrick Sullivan was reliable. Patrick Sullivan never said no. Now 1,000 feet below ground, Patrick swung his pickaxe and admitted a truth he'd never spoken aloud. He was afraid of stillness, afraid that if he stopped moving, stopped working, stopped sacrificing, he'd have to confront what 5 years of Christmas days had cost him. Easier to break rock than break open a heart. His lamp flickered. Patrick steadied it, checked the flame. 9 more hours until his shift ended. 9 more hours of darkness and dust and the ringing sound of metal on stone. 9 more hours before he'd walk home expecting sleeping children in silent rooms and another Christmas. Survived. The feast takes shape. The general store smelled of wood smoke and cinnamon. Harold stood behind the counter, spectacles perched on his nose, sorting through ledgers. He looked up when Clara entered. "Ms. Brennan, didn't expect customers this morning." I need supplies. Harold, for Christmas dinner. He set down his pencil. Interested now. Thought you'd be at the church social later. I'm cooking at home today. Clara pulled out her list. I'll need a ham, your best one, and potatoes, carrots, real butter if you have it. Flour and lard for pie crust. Harold read the list, eyebrows rising. That's a lot of food for one person. It's not for one person. He studied her face, then nodded slowly. Understanding dawned. Patrick Sullivan's your neighbor. He is. That man works harder than 3 men put together. Harold moved toward the storeroom. I'll get you the ham, and Ms. Brennan put it on account. Pay me after New Year's. Clara's throat tightened. That's kind of you. Kindness is celebrating Christmas proper. I'll throw in dried apples for that pie. 20 minutes later, Clara walked home with supplies that made her basket heavy. Snow had started falling again, soft flakes that caught in her hair. She passed neighbors heading to church, accepted their greetings, deflected their curiosity. The Sullivan children were still outside. They'd given the snowman a carrot nose and coal buttons. Annie was trying to reach high enough to add a hat. Need help, Clara called. 4 faces turned toward her. Wary, polite. These were children who'd learned caution early. James stepped forward. We're fine, ma'am. Thank you kindly. Clara set down her basket. I'm Clara Brennan. I've been meaning to introduce myself properly. But I'm terrible at being neighborly. She smiled. I'm cooking Christmas dinner today. And I've made far too much for one person. Your father's invited. All of you are. Annie's eyes went wide. Pa doesn't come home till midnight. Then we'll wait till midnight. Samuel, the middle boy, frowned. That's a long time to wait. Good thing I like waiting. Clara picked up her basket. And good thing I could use help cooking. Any of you know how to peel potatoes? Tommy, the youngest, raised his hand like he was in school. I can peel potatoes. James hadn't moved. His face held the careful blankness of someone deciding whether to trust. Pa says we don't take charity, ma'am. Good thing this isn't charity. Clara met his eyes steadily. It's Christmas, and I'm cooking. Your father deserves to come home to more than cold stew and sleeping children. And honestly, I'd like the company. The silence stretched. Snow fell. Clara waited, letting James make the decision. Finally, Annie spoke. Can we really help cook? I'm counting on it. James's shoulders dropped half an inch. We'd be honored. Ms. Brennan. Clara's kitchen filled with children and purpose. They peeled potatoes and rolled dough and set the table with Clara's good dishes. The ham went into the oven, filling the house with rich smell. Annie proved surprisingly skilled with pie crust. Tommy chattered constantly, telling stories about his father that made Clara's heart ache. By late afternoon, the feast was ready. Clara stoked the fire to keep everything warm. Through the window, the December sun began its early descent. Annie stood beside Clara, flour still dusting her dark hair. Ms. Brennan, do you really think Pa will be happy when he comes home and sees all this? Clara knelt to meet the girl's eyes. I think your father has been strong for a very long time. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is let someone else be strong for them. Annie considered this, then nodded. Ma used to say that. She said Pa needed looking after, even though he thought he was doing all the looking after himself. Your mother sounds like she was wise. She was. Annie's voice dropped to a whisper. I'm glad you came to help us wait for him, Ms. Brennan. I think Ma would have liked you. Clara pulled the girl into a brief hug, then stood and surveyed her transformed kitchen. 4 children, a feast, and lamplight against gathering darkness. They would wait as long as it took. 1,000 feet below, the deep seam held 3 men on Christmas Day. Patrick, old Dan who'd worked the mines for 40 years, and young Miguel, who sent most of his wages back to family in Mexico. They moved through darkness like a slow heartbeat, pickaxes ringing in rhythm. Patrick's shoulders burned. 5 hours into the shift, his muscles remembered every year of coal and stone, but the work was steady, almost meditative. Swing, strike, gather, swing, strike, gather. The repetition left room for thought, which was both blessing and curse. He thought about James's face this morning when he'd woken to find Patrick already gone. The boy hadn't looked surprised, just resigned. Patrick hated that resignation more than he could name. Sullivan? Dan's voice echoed in the tunnel. Lunch break. They gathered in a wider section, where 3 lamps created a circle of light against pressing dark. Patrick opened his pail. Cornbread and salt pork, same as always. Miguel had tortillas wrapped in cloth. Dan produced a flask. Whiskey, the old man said, taking a sip before passing it to Patrick. Christmas tradition, Patrick drank. The liquor burned warm down his throat, settled in his empty stomach like fire. He passed it to Miguel, who shook his head. My wife would smell it, Miguel said, grinning. She'd have my hide. Dan chuckled. Smart woman. How old are your little ones now? 3 and 5. Rosa and Martin. Miguel's face softened talking about them. They'll be opening presents right about now. My wife makes tamales every Christmas. The whole house smells like heaven. Patrick ate his cornbread and said nothing. Dan studied him with eyes that had seen too much and forgiven more. How many years now, Patrick? Since you started working Christmas? 5. A long time for a man to be alone on a holiday. I'm not alone. I have my children, who you never see on Christmas. Dan took another pull from the flask. My Mary's 23 now. Getting married in spring. You know what she told me last week? She said she don't remember the presents I bought when she was little, but she remembers every Christmas morning I wasn't there. Patrick's hands stilled on the lunch pail. I was providing, Dan continued, voice gentle, working overtime, saving for her future. Thought I was doing right. But what she needed wasn't money. It was me. Miguel shifted uncomfortably. Patrick could feel the younger man's eyes on him. I keep my kids fed. Patrick said, clothed, safe. You do. Dan nodded. You're a good father. Patrick, best provider in this mine. But I'm just wondering, he paused, choosing words carefully. I'm wondering if you're keeping yourself alive, or just your kids. The question hung in the dust-thick air. Patrick wanted to argue. Wanted to list everything his wages provided, every need met, every crisis averted. But the words stuck in his throat because Dan's question had found the truth Patrick spent 5 years avoiding. He wasn't alive. He was functioning. Moving through days like the pickaxe moved through coal mechanical, relentless. Breaking everything down to smaller and smaller pieces. I don't know how to be anything else. Patrick admitted quietly. Dan reached over, gripped Patrick's shoulder. Maybe you don't have to figure it out alone. The lunch break ended. They returned to work. Pickaxes ringing in the darkness. But something had shifted in Patrick's chest, a crack in the armor he'd welded around his heart. He had 9 more hours underground. 9 more hours to swing his pickaxe and think about Dan's daughter who remembered absence more than presence. To think about his own children, who'd learned not to expect him on Christmas. To think about what he was actually providing and what he was withholding. For the first time in 5 years, Patrick wanted the shift to end. Wanted to climb into daylight. Wanted to go home. The wanting felt dangerous and necessary in equal measure. When evening comes by 4 o'clock, the feast was ready. Ham glazed and steaming. Potatoes mashed with real butter. Carrots roasted with honey. 2 pies cooling on the sideboard. Clara's table looked like something from a magazine. Every dish arranged with care. The Sullivan children stared at the spread with wide eyes. I ain't never seen so much food, Tommy whispered. Clara smiled, checking the oven temperature one more time. Everything would stay warm. She'd planned carefully, calculating hours and heat. Patrick would come home at midnight to a meal that hadn't dried out or gone cold. If he came home at all. The doubt crept in as sunset painted the windows orange. What if Patrick resented her interference? What if he saw this as charity, an insult to his 5 years of sacrifice? What if she'd created a beautiful gesture that would only wound? Neighbors began stopping by. Widow Johnson brought fresh rolls, eyes curious. The blacksmith's wife added a jar of preserves. Word was spreading through the small town someone was celebrating Patrick Sullivan properly. Clara accepted each contribution with grace, but anxiety tightened her stomach. By 7 o'clock, the sun was gone. Clara lit more lamps. The children played quiet games in the corner, their energy dimming as exhaustion crept in. Tommy's eyes kept drifting shut. Maybe we should let them sleep, Clara said to James. It's been a long day. No. James's voice was firm. We're waiting for Pa. But by 9 o'clock, Samuel's head was drooping. Annie fought to keep her eyes open. Tommy had curled up on the settee, thumb nearly in his mouth. I wanted to stay awake. Samuel mumbled. I wanted Pa to see. Clara's heart broke clean through. She'd thought she was giving Patrick a gift. But maybe she'd only given his children another disappointment, another thing to hope for that wouldn't arrive. At 10 o'clock, Tommy was fully asleep. Samuel dozed against Annie's shoulder. Only James and Annie remained awake, though both looked ready to collapse. Clara stoked the fire, checking it obsessively. The clock on the mantel ticked loud in the quiet house. She'd been so certain this morning, so sure that cooking a feast and waiting would somehow heal 5 years of absence. Now she felt foolish, presumptuous. Who was she to decide what Patrick Sullivan needed? She was just a lonely widow, projecting her own grief onto someone else's family. Ms. Brennan. Annie's voice was small. Do you think Pa will mind that we're here? Clara sat beside the girl, smoothing dark hair that reminded her painfully of the mother Annie barely remembered. I think your father works very hard to take care of you. And sometimes people who take care of everyone else forget they deserve care too. Pa never forgets us. I know, sweetheart. But does he remember himself? Annie's face crumpled slightly. He's always tired. And sad, even when he tries not to be. James stood abruptly, moving to the window. His shoulders were rigid. We're staying awake, he said again. But his voice cracked. All of us. Pa's worked 5 Christmases alone. Tonight he comes home to family. The words were brave, but they carried the weight of a 13-year-old boy who'd been trying to be a man for too long. Clara joined James at the window. Snow was falling again, covering the world in white silence. Somewhere out there, Patrick Sullivan was finishing his shift, preparing to walk home expecting nothing but sleeping children and cold rooms. He'll come, Clara said, more to herself than James. And we'll be here. Why are you doing this? James asked quietly. You don't owe us anything. Clara considered her answer carefully. Because I've been alone too. And I know what it feels like to think you don't deserve celebration. Your father's not the only person who needs to remember that working hard and being loved aren't the same thing. James looked at her. Really looked. And she saw understanding dawn in his young face. Thank you, he whispered. 11 o'clock, 11:15, 11:30. Clara checked the feast one more time. Everything was perfect. Everything was waiting. Please, she thought. Please let this heal something instead of breaking it worse. At 11:45, the lamp began to flicker. Clara reached for the oil reservoir with steady hands. She would not let the light go out. Not tonight. She refilled the lamp. James stoked the fire one final time, adding wood until flames leaped high. Annie shook Samuel awake, then gently roused Tommy. Pa's almost home, she told them. Stay awake just a little longer. 11:55. The house held its breath. Then footsteps on the porch, heavy, exhausted. The particular rhythm of a man who'd spent 12 hours breaking stone. The door handle turned. The vigil Patrick's key scraped in the lock. His hands were numb with cold, clumsy after 12 hours gripping a pickaxe. He expected darkness, expected to navigate by memory to his bedroom, strip off coal-dusted clothes, fall into bed. Instead, lamplight, golden and warm, spilling through the crack of Clara Brennan's door, the door he shared a wall with, the door that was never open this late. Voices. Children's voices. Patrick's heart lurched. Something was wrong. Had to be. His kids should be asleep in their own beds, not next door at midnight on Christmas. He pushed through Clara's door without knocking. The scene that greeted him made no sense. His 4 children, all awake, gathered in Clara's front room. The seamstress stood near the stove, still fully dressed. And the smell God. The smell of food. Real food. Ham and fresh bread and something sweet. Pa. Tommy launched himself forward, but James caught him. Patrick stood frozen in the doorway. Coal dust covered him from head to foot. His face was black except where sweat had traced clean lines. He was filthy, exhausted, confused. Clara stepped forward. Her expression was gentle. Welcome home. Patrick. His mouth opened, closed. No words came. We waited for you, Annie said, her voice trembling with excitement or exhaustion or both. All of us. Ms. Brennan cooked Christmas dinner, and we helped, and we stayed awake. Because we wanted you to know what? Patrick's voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. That you matter. James said, not just what you do for us. You... Patrick's vision blurred. He blinked hard, trying to clear it, but the blur remained. Wetness tracked down his cheeks, cutting clean paths through the coal dust. He was crying, in front of his children, in front of this woman he barely knew. He struggled for words. The children should be in bed. I work so they can eat, so they can have good things. I don't need... You deserve to celebrate, Clara said quietly, firmly. You've worked 5 Christmases alone, Patrick Sullivan. Tonight, you come home to more than silence. Something in Patrick's chest cracked. 5 years of armor. 5 years of telling himself that sacrifice was enough, that wages equaled love. Dan's words from the lunch break echoed. Are you keeping yourself alive? Or just your kids? He wasn't alive. He was a ghost in his own house, a man his children loved but never saw, a father who provided everything except himself. The tears came harder. Patrick's shoulders shook. He tried to stop, tried to swallow the sobs, but they broke through anyway. 5 years of grief and loneliness and exhaustion poured out of him in Clara Brennan's front room. Annie ran to him then, despite the coal dust, and wrapped her arms around his waist. Then Samuel. Then Tommy. James came last, tall enough now to put his arms over Patrick's shoulders. They held him while he broke apart. Clara watched, hands clasped, her own eyes bright with tears. She didn't speak, didn't intrude, just witnessed Patrick Sullivan's surrender with the dignity it deserved. Finally, when the sobs quieted to shaking breaths, Patrick raised his head, looked at Clara through the blur of tears and lamplight. Why, he asked, why would you do this? Clara moved closer, her voice steady. Because I've been alone 5 years too. Because I know what it's like to think you don't deserve softness. Because I saw you. Patrick. Not just a man working, a man worthy of being seen. Patrick's throat closed again. No one had seen him in so long. He'd worked so hard to be invisible, to measure his worth only in wages and sacrifice. I don't know how to stop, he whispered. Don't know how to be anything but... You don't have to stop. Clara reached out slowly, carefully, and took his coal-blackened hand. Her grip was warm, solid, real. You just have to let someone walk beside you. Patrick looked down at their joined hands. Her clean fingers wrapped around his ruined ones. She wasn't pulling away, wasn't repulsed by the dirt or the brokenness or the tears. She was holding on. Thank you, he managed. Clara squeezed gently. You're home now. Let's eat. Midnight homecoming. Clara sent Patrick to wash while she warmed the food. He stood at her basin, scrubbing coal dust from his face and hands with soap that smelled like lavender. The water turned black immediately. He had to change it 3 times before his skin looked human again. In the mirror, a stranger stared back. Same face, same lines. But something had shifted. The armor was gone. Patrick Sullivan stood naked in his own grief and exhaustion and desperate need for exactly what Clara was offering. He changed into the clean shirt James brought from their house, ran damp hands through his hair. His body ached, but it was different now. Not just physical pain, but the deep ache of muscles finally allowed to rest. When he returned to Clara's front room, the table was set, 5 places. His children already seated, eyes bright despite the late hour. Clara stood at the head, carving ham with practiced efficiency. Sit, she told Patrick, gesturing to the chair beside hers. He sat. The chair held him like an embrace. Clara piled his plate with food, ham and potatoes and carrots and fresh bread with real butter. Patrick stared at it, overwhelmed. When was the last time someone had served him a meal? When had he last sat down to eat instead of standing? Over the stove. Tired beyond measure. Pa. Tommy's voice was uncertain. Aren't you gonna eat? Patrick picked up his fork. His hand shook slightly. He took a bite of ham, and the taste exploded across his tongue. Rich. Savory. Perfect. He'd forgotten food could taste like this. Around the table, his children ate with the enthusiasm of young bodies needing fuel. But they watched him too, checking to make sure he was really there, really eating, really present. Clara sat beside him, her plate less full. She ate slowly, quietly. Her presence was calm water after years of drowning. Ms. Brennan makes the best potatoes, Samuel announced through a full mouth. Samuel, manners, James corrected, but he was smiling. It's true, though, Annie added. And she let us help with everything. I rolled the pie crust all by myself. Tommy bounced in his seat. I peeled 17 potatoes. Their voices overlapped, telling Patrick about their day, about cooking and waiting and staying awake, about Clara teaching Annie to crimp pie edges and Tommy learning to test if bread was done by tapping the crust. Patrick listened, fork moving automatically from plate to mouth. His children were happy. Not performing happiness, not pretending, genuinely joyful. When had he last heard them like this? This is better than Ma's cooking, Tommy declared, then froze. His eyes went wide with horror at his own words. The table went silent. Patrick's chest tightened. Sarah, always Sarah, the ghost at every meal, every Christmas, every moment of their lives. He set down his fork carefully, looked at his youngest son's terrified face. Tommy thought he'd betrayed his mother's memory, thought he'd wounded his father with truth. Your ma, Patrick said slowly, would have loved this feast. She'd have loved Ms. Brennan's kindness. And she'd have loved seeing you all so happy. Tommy's eyes filled with tears. Really? Really? Patrick's voice steadied. Your ma wouldn't want us frozen in grief. She'd want us to live, to accept help, to let good people like Ms. Brennan be part of our family. Clara's hand found his under the table. Squeezed once. Patrick squeezed back. After the meal, Clara served pie. Annie beamed with pride as her father took the first bite and declared it the best thing he'd ever tasted. Tommy fell asleep with his head on the table. Samuel and Annie weren't far behind. James helped clear dishes, moving between kitchen and dining area with practiced efficiency. Clara washed while Patrick dried. The domestic rhythm felt strange and natural in equal measure. "I worked 5 Christmases," Patrick said quietly, thinking I was doing right, thinking sacrifice was love. Clara rinsed a plate. "Sacrifice is love, but it's not the only kind. I've been so afraid." The words came unbidden. Afraid to stop moving. Afraid if I let myself feel, I'd fall apart. "You did fall apart." Clara glanced at him. "And you're still standing." Patrick dried another dish. His hands moved steadily, no longer shaking. "I don't deserve this. Any of it." "That's grief talking." Clara's voice was firm. "You deserve celebration. Deserve rest. Deserve someone seeing you as more than just what you provide." "Why you?" Patrick asked. "Why did you do all this?" Clara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried its own weight of loss. "Because I've been alone too long. Because I have no children of my own. Because watching you walk to that mine every morning before dawn broke my heart a little more each day." She met his eyes. "Because maybe we're supposed to help each other survive this life." Patrick set down the dish towel, turned to face her fully. "I don't know what happens next. Don't know how to be different." "You don't have to be different." Clara dried her hands. "You just have to not be alone." Through the doorway, they could see 3 children asleep on the settee, tangled together like puppies. James dozed in the armchair, head tilted back. Patrick's children, safe, fed, happy, and beside him, a woman who'd spent Christmas Day cooking for a family that wasn't hers, waiting for a man she barely knew, Clara Brennan, who'd given him the gift he'd spent 5 years denying himself the right to be more than a provider, the right to be human. "Stay," Patrick said quietly. "In our lives. Please." Clara smiled. "Every Christmas from now on, I'll wait, however late you come home." Patrick took her hand, held it like an anchor. "Then I'll come home to you." The clock struck 1 in the morning. December 26, 1887. The lamp still burned golden on the table. The fire still crackled in the hearth. And for the first time in 5 years, Patrick Sullivan was home. Every Christmas from now on, they ate Clara's pie at 1:30. Children groggy but determined not to miss another moment. Patrick sat at the head of the table with Tommy in his lap, the boy's head heavy against his chest. This was what Christmas should feel like. Full bellies in warm rooms and family pressed close. James tried to help clean up, but Clara shooed him toward the settee. "You've done enough today. Rest." The boy didn't argue. Within minutes, all 4 children were asleep in Clara's front room, unwilling to leave even for their own beds. They'd waited too long for their father. They weren't letting him out of sight. Patrick and Clara finished the dishes in companionable silence. The work was simple, meditative: wash, dry, stack, wash, dry, stack. Their hands moved in rhythm, occasionally brushing. "I work Christmas next year too," Patrick said finally. "Contract set. Triple pay keeps us going through winter." "I know. But I could come home at midnight." "If you'd wait." Clara set down the last plate, turned to face him. Lamplight caught the silver threads in her dark hair. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with youth. The beauty of a woman who'd survived loss and chosen kindness anyway. "I'll wait every year," she promised. "Every Christmas, I'll cook. Your children and I will keep the feast warm. And when you come through that door, covered in coal dust and exhausted, you'll come home to more than silence." Patrick's throat tightened again. He'd cried more tonight than in 5 years combined. But these tears were different. Not grief or pain or breaking. Just overwhelming gratitude for this unexpected grace. "I don't know how to court a woman," He said it plainly, without shame. Been so long since I was anything but a father and a minor. I don't know how to be courted. Clara's smile was soft. Been a widow so long I forgot what it feels like to be seen as more than someone to pity. Then we'll figure it out together. They moved to the front room, careful not to wake the children. Patrick took the armchair. Clara sat in her rocker. The fire burned low, but neither rose to stoke it. They simply sat in the quiet of the after hours. When Christmas was over, but its gifts remained. Tell me about Sarah, Clara said. Patrick blinked, surprised. Most people avoided mentioning his dead wife, treated her memory like something dangerous. You sure? I'm sure. If I'm going to be part of your family, I should know who came before. So Patrick told her about meeting Sarah at a church social when they were both 17, about her laugh that sounded like music, about the 4 babies they'd had, each one a blessing she'd carried with joy, about her skill with a needle, how she could make new clothes from scraps, about the day she died, and how part of him had died too. Clara listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said simply, "She sounds like she was wonderful." She was. I'm not trying to replace her. I know. Patrick met Clara's eyes. But maybe there's room for both. For honoring what was and accepting what could be. Clara's smile widened. I'd like that. Dawn began to creep through the windows, gray light replacing lamplight. December 26th arriving quiet and slow. Patrick knew he should move the children home. Let Clara rest. But he couldn't bring himself to break this moment. Pa! James stirred in his sleep. Voice thick. You still here? I'm here, son. Good. The boy settled back into sleep. Patrick looked at Clara. At this woman who'd chosen to see him, who'd spent Christmas Day giving his family a gift they didn't know they needed, who'd waited however long it took for a coal miner to come home. Thank you, he said again. Because the words never felt adequate, but they were all he had. Thank you for letting me wait. Clara stood, moved to the window. Outside. Snow had stopped falling. The world was white and clean and new. You know what I learned today? What? That sometimes the best way to heal yourself is to help someone else heal. She glanced back at him. I've been alone 5 years. Patrick. Today. I had a family, even if it was borrowed, even if it was just for Christmas. It doesn't have to be borrowed. Patrick rose, joined her at the window. Their shoulders touched. Could be permanent, if you wanted. Clara leaned into him slightly. Not a dramatic gesture, just a small acknowledgement of possibility. I'd like that, she said, on the settee. Tommy mumbled in his sleep. Annie's hand found Samuel's. James breathed deep and steady, finally at peace. Patrick watched his children sleep in Clara Brennan's house and felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not the weight of sacrifice. Not the burden of provision. Something lighter. Hope. He'd worked 5 Christmases alone, measuring his love in absence, telling himself that wages were enough, that his children needed his money more than his presence. But Clara had shown him a different truth. That sacrifice without joy became prison. That a man could provide and still starve. That sometimes the strongest thing a person could do was accept help. The lamp on the table flickered, almost out of oil. Clara moved to refill it, but Patrick caught her hand. Let it burn out, he said. Dawn's here. They stood together at the window, watching December 26th arrive. The mine would call again tomorrow. Shifts would resume. Coal would be broken. Wages would be earned. But tonight, this morning, Patrick Sullivan had learned to measure love differently, in presence as well as absence, in coal-stained hands held by clean ones, in feasts kept warm through midnight hours, in children who waited because their father was worth waiting for. Some men measure their love in presence, some in absence. Patrick Sullivan was learning to measure his in both the work that sustained and the home that healed. Clara squeezed his hand. Merry Christmas, Patrick. Merry Christmas. Clara. Outside, the first light of day touched the mountains. Inside, 5 people slept peacefully while 2 stood watch. The lamp burned down to nothing. The fire became embers, but the warmth remained.